Hi, and good evening to all of you. A few months ago, we presented a webinar that talked about choice in retirement. We reflected on the uncertainty and the volatility that COVID had caused, particularly for those of you who were close or actually in retirement. Since then, we've seen some green shoots emerging, although we still do face some times of uncertainty and certainly times of anxiety. Our previous webinar, though, created some wonderful inquiries, questions and requests from our participants, with the vast majority of those being about how members can use their savings as income in retirement and what they need to do to make it meet their needs. How can you live your best retirement? And that is where we will focus today. What I'd like to do, though, before we do get into today's presentation, though, is just reflect on those who are our First Nations people and acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional custodians of our land. The Meanjin are the traditional custodians of this place, Brisbane, where we are broadcasting from this evening, but we also recognise the custodians from right around our entire country. We would like to pay our respect to their elders past, present and emerging. And just one thing that we won't be discussing in great detail tonight is the good news that you would have heard about the merger with QSuper that has been announced in the last 24 hours. What we're focused on is a lot of what we'll be discussing tonight, but certainly focused on the fact that 1.5 million of you have entrusted us with $80 billion of your money for retirement. If you do have any questions about the merger, we encourage you, please visit our website. There will be regular updates and information available to you. But in the meantime, what we want to focus on tonight is you and the opportunities you have in retirement and how we can make that the best possible retirement for you. On a personal reflection though, 12 months ago, almost to the day, I was in Melbourne presenting with Ruth on stage, and little did we think at that time that it would be the last time we'd see each other. I'm very privileged that I was able to come on a flight today and be in Brisbane, and Ruth, it is wonderful to be in person. I could actually get up and give you a hug right now, but I think our microphones and things will fall off. How are you? How's the last 12 months been?
I am really well, and I'm very excited to be here. And, you know, I'm really impressed with how many of our members have decided to engage in this programme and join us live this evening. So welcome to each and every one of you. Now, it's my job tonight to go through some of the housekeeping. So what I will start by acknowledging is Josh and I, over the last 2 weeks, have enjoyed reading all of your pre-submitted questions, and there were hundreds of them. And it was so valuable to us because what it helped us to do was understand the types of things you would like us to share information on. So truth be told, we've actually built tonight's content on the back of those questions. So I'm confident that all of those pre-submitted questions will be addressed this evening over the next hour. Now, there may have been a small number that fell out of scope, in which case we will be in touch with you over the coming days with an answer. Now, underneath your screen, you should see an ability to pop through questions live. Like all women, of course, I'm multitasking this evening. I've got my iPad and I can see your live questions coming through. So we're very much looking forward to seeing those come through as well and engage in a nice hearty Q&A at the end, Josh. So I'm hoping we get some tricky ones for you today. Now look, on the right hand side of your screen you will also notice that there is a request to complete your details for a callback from our financial planning team. Now, I mentioned that there's a huge number of you engaged and there's a huge number of you dialed in this evening. Each and every one of you has your own story. And Josh and I sitting here tonight, we don't know that story. All we can do is share content with you of a general nature. So please be aware that all of the information we discuss here tonight should be interpreted as general financial advice only, not personal advice. If you want the ability to lift that content up and map it into your own personal story, understanding better what strategies would suit you based on the age you're at, what's going to give you tax benefits, what pitfalls should you really avoid, all of that's going to be available to you by having a chat with one of our financial planners. Remember, members of Sun Super have access to a very unique and a very great benefit, which is access to that financial planning. And it's available to you at no cost. Now, the team has grown there, Josh, hasn't it? A lot over the last few years for a reason. It has grown because members want this advice, but more so because members actually need this advice. So if there's anything that resonates with you this evening that you want to personalise, or you've got any personal questions, just pop your details through into that page on the right hand side of your screen, and we'll be in touch with you over the coming days to give you that support. Now, Josh, over the recent weeks, I mentioned we looked at a lot of those questions. There were so many, we really enjoyed it. A lot of them were age-based. So a lot of people want to understand what key ages should they be keeping an eye on, and what would happen when they reach those ages. Do you want to share some info on that for us to start?
Absolutely. And I agree with you, and on reflection, we did have a lot of those questions tell us about your stories. And a lot of those questions were things about, when can I retire? When should I think about retiring? Now, as Ruth said, we have this great advice team, but what we're wanting to do tonight is help you understand the questions that you should be asking, the things that you should be thinking about. And I think, although we don't want to say that your stories can be pigeonholed, I think it's important that we maybe reflect just for a moment on the government's recent retirement income review. And what the retirement income review found was that the majority of us, which is probably not something we didn't know, but the majority of us are actually retiring after the age of 60. So in that area of 60 to 70. But what was really interesting from the retirement income review was to show us that those retiring early, so before 60, usually didn't have choice.
That's right.
That in the case of those people retiring before the age of 60, it was really as a result of ill health, it was as a result of ill health perhaps of a partner, or it was as a result of a change in their working circumstance. Choice, which is something we talk a lot about tonight, giving you choice in retirement, really came up for those people who had turned 60, but particularly for those people who were older than 65. That's when we saw that really people were choosing to move into retirement. So as much as we talk about choice, there is legislative boundaries, or what I almost put as bookends, that control when a lot of people may in fact make the decision to start to retire. At one end of that, we've got what we call preservation age, which is increasing to the age of 60. And legislatively, this really means that from that point, you are able to access your super. And the way that you can access your super really depends as to whether you've retired or not. So once you've reached preservation age, if you've permanently retired, then you are able to access your super in whichever way you want. And we'll be talking about those ways shortly. If you're still working though, you can access your super, but something else we'll be talking about tonight is that if you've not yet retired, you're actually restricted to just taking that as an income. You can't take lump sum withdrawals. At the other bookend, or the other end of that discussion, is the age pension, which used to be available from the age of 65 or age 60 for women, and that is increasing to the age of 67. And we see a lot of people making their plans about retirement around when they can start to access the age pension. But there are also two opportunities that you can have between those two. That is that if you actually have a change in your working circumstances at the age of 60 or afterwards, then you can take out and use whatever super that you've accrued to that point, regardless of what your next job is. You can also, from your 65th birthday, you can start to have full access to your super, again, regardless as to whether you've retired or not. The thing, though, that we're trying to stress here, both with what we saw in the retirement income review, but also these legislative ages, is ultimately we want to give you the capacity to choose when you retire, the opportunity to have the retirement you want and to be comfortable in that retirement.
I will interrupt you just quickly, Josh, because like I said, I am watching the questions coming through, and there's a lovely one here already that's pertinent to this particular point.
It's not from my mother-in-law who's joining tonight.
Your
Hi, Matty.
I don't think it's actually from Shane, and Shane has suggested that he's 62. Would there be a tax implication for his age group should he withdraw super or be eligible to withdraw?
Yep.
So do you want to just quickly cover that while we're here?
So I'll come back to this maybe a bit later on, but seeing the questions come up, there is another consideration around age that really the government wants you to try and push out using your super as late as they can, or as late as you can. If you take your super before you turn 60, there's going to be tax implications of some nature. If you keep your super in your account until after 60 and then start taking it, then it becomes tax-free. So it is the carrot on the stick here.
So 60 is that golden age where it's tax-free access.
Absolutely.
That's right.
If a trick question does come through from my mother-in-law, please let me know.
I'll keep an eye.
But Ruth, I think it's important though that we think about where though does retirement income come from? We've obviously talked here just about super, but what should people be thinking about?
Well, look, I think when you're planning for retirement and planning where the income's going to come from, it's important to think beyond just your superannuation. And, you know, super is one channel that will feed income in retirement, but there are others. So we're going to talk this evening about the role that age pension will play alongside superannuation, because they can complement each other beautifully. And remembering that retirement is not black and white anymore. It's very rare now for somebody to hang up their boots on a Friday evening and be fully retired on Monday morning.
And we do actually know, based on our own research, that half of our members don't retire
do that.
once.
Yeah, they tend to retire far more than once. So I think it's important that we're realistic here about the fact that super won't be everything. There will be some form of other potential income that may be fed through in retirement. But I think sometimes to get a good appreciation and a good understanding of the role that superannuation plays in your retirement, a great starting point is to imagine your retirement if you had no super and no assets. And what would that look like? And the reality is that would actually look like the age pension. All right. And the age pension in this country is a safety net, and it's a critical source of income for many people. We know that people who are currently retired, at least 80% of them are getting some form of age pension. And of those, well over half of them are getting the full age pension. So we know the age pension is needed to keep the lights on and put food in the bellies of many retirees in this country. The only concern about relying wholly and solely about the age pension is you've got no control over your own retirement story. You don't get to determine what age you're eligible for age pension. You will be told you can retire at 67 and no earlier, if that's where your income needs to come from. You don't get to control the lifestyle that that's going to offer you, because the age pension rates are set, and you don't get to control how much money you'd like to get. The government decides that. And even coming down to more practical things, you don't get to control whether or not you'd prefer a monthly income or a fortnightly income. You get what you get, and you don't get upset kind of concept. So the age pension gives you very little room to move. The role that superannuation plays, and the reason why we're so passionate about people having good super, is back to that point. It gives you choice. It gives you the ability to write your own retirement story. Superannuation, as Josh mentioned, will become accessible to you at the age of 60 in some way or another. This is giving you an opportunity to choose your own retirement age between 60 and 67, or beyond if you wish. But not only that, it's also giving you an opportunity to be more in control of the lifestyle you'll have and how you enter retirement, right? As opposed to having to go from the black and white full-time work to retirement. So super is a wonderful tool for freedom and choice.
And I think I'll talk about the age pension in one sec, but I think That's the important thing for us to discuss tonight, that the age pension will be, for the majority of us, certainly for the medium term, will be a key part of our income.
That's right.
It will always exist. What your super allows you to do is think beyond those rules, to think about the freedom, choice and flexibility that you have. So as Ruth said, there are rules here, and the first is to do with when you can actually start to receive the age pension, and it all depends on age. The age pension age, as I said earlier, is increasing progressively from the age of 65 to the age of 67. There was consideration by the government a few terms ago to actually try and increase that to age 70. That never went through Parliament, never passed the Senate. So there's no legislation to increase it further. But what I would say, probably more for people of our generation, that we have to be aware that age pension will have to move in some sense, that we are living for longer, the government is having to support us for longer with the age pension. So that age pension age of 67, although I wouldn't suggest it would worry the older members that are listening now, but certainly of our age group, we would have to worry. For your girls and for my son, it'll be age 100 probably. But what the bigger hurdle is, though, is once you reach that age pension age, you then have to pass 2 tests. An income test, which will effectively add up everything that you earn, whether that be employment income, investment income, rental income, income from every source. And they will then determine whether that income means that you actually deserve an age pension. They will also do an assets test, which will look at absolutely everything you own, your furniture, your car, whatever it may be, but they will exclude your family home. Now, the recent Retirement Income Review actually reaffirmed that the family home, there is no intention to suggest that that should be part of the assets test. So no, the asset test currently includes everything bar your family home. Now, the bad news here is that whichever test you go worse in will actually determine what you get as age pension. So you go through both these tests, they'll give each of them a result, and whichever one is the worst result, that tells you how your age pension will look. Now, we don't want to spend too much time on it, but really what you've got is, firstly, in case of the income test, they will look at whether you are a single person or partnered. And depending on that, they will determine what age pension rate you will actually get. If you earn in all income sources less than that threshold that we're showing on screen, then congratulations, you will pass the age pension test in this case and get the full age pension under it. If, though, you approach the cut-off in all your income combined, you will only qualify for the part pension, and if your income is higher than the cut-off, you will get nothing. Now, Ruth mentioned earlier that a vast majority of Australians get the age pension once they reach age pension age, and that a vast majority of those get the full age pension. They pass the income test in most cases. Where we tend to see part pensioners occur is with the assets test, and that people just have too much locked away in savings. And this could include locked away in investment properties and the like. What the government will do here is not just look at whether you are single or partnered, but also look at whether you own your own home or not. And remembering they exclude the value of your principal residence from this, if all your assets put together add up to the threshold, then congratulations, you'll get the full age pension. Between the threshold and the cut-off, you'll get a part pension. Greater than the cut-off, you will get nothing. So this is really the first hurdle, and I say that when it comes to retirement, there's a holy trinity that you really need to think about in retirement. That is, how do you reduce your tax? How do you maximise your age pension? And how do you make sure you are getting the highest amount of income you can? The maximising your age pension is a really important consideration, especially for any of you who might be getting close to those cut-offs. But Ruth, we often joke about the $1 million question we get asked is, do I need $1 million? Do you want to talk us through how people should think about this?
Yeah, and it's interesting. In my day job, when I'm not in the studio with the bright lights with you, Josh, I am actually spending a lot of time talking to our members, and I do a lot of one-on-one work with members. And even just as recently as yesterday, I spoke with multiple members. And often I'll ask them when they come in to sit with me is, what prompted you to want to talk to me today? Was there something in particular? The most common response I get is, I just wanted to see, was there anything I should be doing and am I on track? And when I ask back to that member, okay, are you on track for what? What are you trying to get to? They have no idea. So the biggest challenge that people actually face when it comes to trying to plan for their retirement is understanding what they're actually trying to plan for. People find it very difficult to nut this out. And I often say you need to break things down into 3 different categories. Number 1, you need to consider what kind of external financial assets you might have in retirement to have any sort of indication as to how much superannuation you're going to need. Because remember, if you're going to be somebody that's receiving income from external assets, that might be an investment property, for example, that's going to take the pressure off how much super you need. And then also, if you're going to be somebody that's eligible for the full age pension, well, then that's going to be an important consideration in that income that you're going to try and generate. So you've got to think about that side of things first. The second factor that you've got to try and think about is the personal factor, I often say. And this is asking questions like, well, are you going to retire as a single person or are you actually going to retire as a couple? Because let me break the bad news here. It is quite challenging financially to retire as a single person. The council doesn't half your rates because you're single. You've still got a lot of full bills that need to be paid there. So financially struggling for single people is a reality, more so than for a couple. And the other personal factor is your age and what age you think you might like to retire. Because clearly somebody that has their eyes on retirement at 60 is going to need far more money than the person who might want to retire at 70. And yet people really struggle to nut these questions out. So you've got to have a think about those. But the most difficult one for people to answer is, what kind of a lifestyle are you trying to fund here? And this is the question that really catches people, is what kind of an income are you trying to generate? Because until we know at least an indication of this, we will never be able to tell you whether you're on track for your super balance or not, given that super will play a role here. So you've got to really take time to go through those 3 factors and work through them. Now, we know in Australia, we've already touched on it, that everybody has a safety net. And this is where you start. This is your starting point. Josh, you touched on the age pension already and gave us an insight as to, what the eligibility criteria might be. What you didn't show us, which many people already are aware, was, well, how much would I get if I was eligible for the full pension? And these numbers here on the screen will show you what the full age pension rate is. And what you'll see is it's not overly attractive. It won't give you the kind of lifestyle that allows you an awful lot of freedom. Okay, so you wouldn't be going on your Maroochydore holidays twice a year, Josh, if you were relying on the age pension, right? You'd have to be very strict about budgeting. The role that super plays in your other assets will be sometimes, yes, it might be to replace the age pension altogether, but in most cases it will be in addition to the age pension. Now at Sun Super, and we've done a lot of research on helping members understand different types of lifestyles, and there's a lot of external research done on this as well. Now we know at Sun Super we want everybody to be better than the age pension. We don't want our members scrimping and scraping. We want them to have a better lifestyle. And realistically, when the average Australian is presented with the numbers, they tend to be drawn to that doing well number. So for a couple, they like the idea of about 60-odd thousand a year in retirement, net figures here. So this is just giving you a guide as to what most Australians. Now, there will be people listening tonight who will want far more than that. And there will be others who are quite happy with significantly less than that. This is just giving you an insight. At Sun Super, we want to try and always make sure that our members can be as close or beyond that doing well category if we can. And that is part of the role of our financial planners, because sometimes jumping from a comfortable lifestyle to a doing well lifestyle can actually be quite achievable through small little subtle strategies, can't it? It's not always about moving mountains.
Absolutely, and I think if we can go back to another point as well, these numbers that we're showing here, yes, we're talking about super tonight, but just remember, as we've already talked about, age pension could be part of this. Employment income of some description into retirement could be part of this. So those numbers may not be as out of reach for some of you, and we'll go through some of this in one moment as they could be. But I guess the question then comes, how do you start?
That's right. And look, there's lots of tools out there that are going to help you start. And I've spoken to many people. Just through conversation, I'm able to tell them, or maybe not even tell them, but acknowledge that sometimes people are already there. So they're trying to get strategies to help them get on track, and they're terrified to retire. And they're actually already at the point they've achieved what they're trying to achieve if they sit down and work through it. And one of the great tools that Sun Super members have access to is the Retirement Forecaster. And you can get access to that through the website. The easiest route to get to it is just to type in Retirement Forecaster in our search pane, and it will pop up. And it's going to ask you for some very basic details like the age you'd like to retire and the income that you might like to live on. And it will give you a close indication as to whether you're really far off that, achieving that, or whether you're actually already at the point of having achieved it. Because what's disheartening is when you're out at workplaces and you're talking to people, and you hear people who are so unhappy at work and they just want to retire, and they actually reached their retirement goal 4 years ago, but they're just scared. They're not sure what to do next, and they're not sure if they're on track. And that's why talking to somebody is so important.
Absolutely. And although there's tools like our forecaster, I think it's important to realise this tool isn't in and of itself the solution. This is what should make you find some comfort, and whether it's comfort or not, to actually then engage and have a discussion about how you can best utilise it.
That's right. Now, moving on, Josh, I can see there's actually 2 questions that have popped in just over the last minute or two, and they're both related to what happens when you actually make that decision at retirement. So it's kind of around structuring your superannuation. What are you supposed to do the day you retire with your super?
So we'll come to this, and the question is timely. Some of the people watching are obviously keen. The question is timely, but there are actually 4 routes that you can go down when you get to that point of knowing and deciding that you're going to retire and what you do with your super. The first is you can just leave it in super. Now, there are pros and cons to this, which we'll unpack in a few minutes, but you can just leave it in super. You don't have to take it out if you don't want to. You can, if you choose, take some of it out as a withdrawal. You can withdraw the entire thing. You can take it all as cash. But again, pros and cons that we'll go through with that. The third, and we're going to, as I said in the introduction, we'll actually spend some time on this one because it's where we got our most questions when we presented in October last year, is around choices around income stream. And I'll come to that in a moment. But the fourth path is to go, well, you don't just have to do one of those things. In fact, you can do a combination of them to meet your circumstances. You might choose that you want to withdraw some now, buy that caravan or whatever it may be, pay off the mortgage, and then you want to put the rest in an income stream. Again, what we're coming to here is that it is your super. You do have choice, you do have flexibility, and we want to give you some insight onto that choice and flexibility this evening. If I can focus though on a retirement income account, and the best way I describe this is where you've retired, you don't want the hassle of managing your income. Let's be frank, you've been earning a wage your entire life. This is a way for you to pay yourself a wage in retirement, that you use your super to actually put it into a retirement savings account. This you can do at any point that you've permanently retired after reaching that preservation age that we talked about earlier, and it gives you 3 really important advantages. Firstly, you have investment control here. And that's important because we know that a lot of people moving into retirement still want the ability to invest their money, to see their money grow, whereas for others, they may actually want to think about investing that more conservatively. And that's something we'll unpack shortly. But you have investment choice. The important thing with that investment choice, or the beautiful thing with it, is once you start a retirement savings account, your investment earnings are completely tax-free. It is the only investment in Australia that offers that.
Yeah.
That in retirement, once you start a income account, those investment earnings you make, you are making gross. You're not paying tax on it. The second thing is that you have control, which I've already alluded to, over your payments, not just in the amount you want to receive, but also in how regularly you want to receive that. If you currently get paid fortnightly, you can continue that in retirement. If you currently get paid monthly, you can continue that. If you just want a payment made to you annually or half yearly as a lump sum, maybe around Christmas time or a time of year where you traditionally go on holidays, you can do that. You have control, choice, and flexibility around your income. The third thing though is with a retirement income account in super, unlike some other products out there such as annuities, that you can make withdrawals from these. Your super is now your money once you've retired, and although you're choosing to put it into a retirement income account to have that regular income, if you need a lump sum to upgrade the car, to go on holidays, whatever it may be, you can do that. You have that choice. Now, with everything to do with super, there are some rules, but luckily the rules here are actually quite small. And the main is that the government typically forces you to take a minimum amount out of your super when you commence a retirement income stream. And the reason why they do this is your investment earnings are tax-free. If you're over the age of 60, the income you're receiving is tax-free. If you take any lump sum withdrawals after the age of 60, they're tax-free. The government doesn't give you tax-free benefits for nothing.
It's a tax-free haven.
That's right. A tax-free haven with one condition. The condition is that you must take a minimum amount each year. And the government does this to ensure that you are taking some form of income from your super. Now, the annual minimum in typical periods, you can see there is 4% under the age of 65, and that gradually increases as you get older. You're having to take larger amounts of your, or larger proportion of your account balance as you age. The government, though, in reaction to COVID last year, actually reduced those payments. They halved how much you are forced to take out of your super. We are yet to see whether the government will continue those in the coming financial year, but on the basis that we have seen a strong recovery over recent months, we will probably assume that the government will let those go back to normal. Now, as I've already said, the other thing here is you have flexibility above those minimums. You can take as much as you want above that, but you also have flexibility in how you want to take it, whether it's fortnightly, monthly, quarterly, half-yearly, annually, however you choose to do that. Again, this is something Ruth and I will come back to again and again. It is about giving you choice and flexibility. Now, the important thing, and I'll come back to this graphic a few times over the course of the evening, and this really links back to not just taking the minimum, and we find that about half of people in a retirement income stream, I think based on the research we've been doing, about half of our members actually do just take the minimum and nothing more. If I can be really frank, because you can see here, this is actually based on a typical member we have retire at the age of 65, and our members would retire at that point with about $300,000. And if they were just to take the minimum, what you can see here, although it's giving them some extra money above the age pension, it's probably not giving them a great deal of flexibility. What I would call out here is that this has extended you from being in that doing okay bucket, or lifestyle that just the age pension provided, to now having a comfortable life. But I would highlight one thing in this. There is money at the end. So this goes up to age 90, and what it shows is that a person's balance of $300,000 when they commenced an income stream at age 65 is pretty much the same when they get to the age of 90. Now, I know that we love to leave money behind for those that follow us, but this is something you'll hear the government talk a lot more about, and it's something we've heard a lot more about from the Retirement Income Review. How do we actually spend our money in retirement? And to be frank, it's thinking about actually making sure your money runs out by the time you do.
And I think, Josh, just to add to that,
Yep.
you know, when that previous slide showed us that people are actually dying with almost as much money in their super as they had when they first started retirement. And if that person lives till 90 and they are passing it on to children, in a lot of cases, those children are retired themselves and have had their own opportunity to build
exactly
wealth.
Right.
And that need for the inheritance is gone. Those years are gone.
And you think they're actually taking on a frugal lifestyle in some cases, or being concerned about spending
for the benefit of people who may be financially secure already and in their own
right.
retirement stage. Yeah.
And what I should say is in all these charts, we're showing to age 90, which a typical woman in Australia will live currently to the age of 85. A typical man will live to the age of 83. So we're talking in these scenarios here about money lasting way after your life expectancy. And what I've done in this case is taken the same circumstance but actually modelled it through our tools, and this is something that our financial planners could do, is I've taken it to the extreme of what if I actually plan to have my balance run out, in this case by the age of 90. And although that means that you haven't left a great deal of assets for those you leave behind, it means that you've actually moved your lifestyle from comfortable to that lifestyle you talked about 10 minutes ago, where most of us want to be, doing well, being really, really comfortable and happy, and not living frugally in retirement. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more as we go on.
At the end of the day, you can't take it with you, right? So
Absolutely.
you might as well just spend it. You worked hard enough for it.
I think you're quoting Josh Frydenberg right there. But
I didn't. That was not intentional. Look, there's actually a question here now, and there was quite a few, Josh, you'll remember from the pre-submitted ones, that came in around people concerned about the costs of transferring their money into an income stream or what member benefits they might lose if they do that. I just want to clarify for you that moving your money from a SunSuper super account into an income stream account, there's no direct cost associated with that at all. Effectively, your account will look and feel exactly the same as it does, and you've got access to all of the same benefits and investment opportunities as you've always had. And in actual fact, which is quite a rare thing in superannuation, is our income stream product from a fees perspective match your superannuation account. So you won't see a hike in fees, you won't be charged to move money into the income stream account. We're very proud at SunSuper that a couple of years ago we were able to bring our administration fee down in line with our super product, which is one of the most competitively priced products on the market at the moment. And remember, the reason why sometimes income streams are more expensive, there's a lot of administration involved. Remember, we do have to pay everybody and different pay cycles. Some people prefer fortnightly, others monthly. And there's also reporting to Centrelink that we do for you. We do that twice a year for you. So it's not unusual to have a more expensive product, but ours is actually in line with our super product, which is really, really good news for members entering the income stream product. So just be aware there's no cost associated with it from that perspective. In actual fact, you gain a member benefit. And the member benefit you gain is access to the retirement bonus scheme. So in essence, in a nutshell, without going into too much information on it, members who are eligible and move their money into the income stream product may actually receive a bonus for doing that. And that's in relation to the fact that income stream products are taxed differently, and it's our way of sort of rewarding our members with that tax concession, if you like, that we're getting as a fund, and making sure we're passing that back to our members. And don't forget the Dream Rewards program. I know a lot of you are using it. There is a huge amount of our members benefiting from this, but it's still a benefit that you'll have even if you're in the income stream phase, and this is where you can get access to discounts on some of the leading retailers in the country. You're a common user of the Dream Rewards, aren't you, Josh? You love a bargain.
But can I also put it that a lot of these benefits come from the fact that we're a not-for-profit fund, that we are a profit for members fund, which will continue with the merger with Q Super. So it's important to understand that these are real tangible benefits you get into retirement from being with a fund like Sun Super.
And just understanding that even though the income stream has different rules, from your perspective, your account will look and feel so much like the super account you've got to know and love, because it is exactly the same to some extent. You've got all the same member benefits, and it will look the same on your mobile app or your account online. The difference is in the rules behind the scenes, and we will look after that for you.
So maybe if I can ask you a question, turn the table.
Oh no, make it an easy one.
So a lot of questions we had pre-submitted that we looked at over the last few weeks were, what about that step if I'm not ready to retire permanently, but if I take that first tentative step, what we call transitioning to retirement. So we had questions around, you are able to get an income stream when you reach preservation age. Do you want to take it?
This is interesting. This is where probably a lot of people listening tonight may sit in this stage of, look, I've reached that preservation age. I know I've reached that because I've just checked, and I know that technically now I could start to access super. You will have all heard of transition to retirement. I get asked about it a lot when I'm talking to people. People are not quite sure what on earth this strategy is. And that's because it's a strategy that can be used for lots of different reasons. So let me first talk you through what exactly a transition to retirement means. It means that while you're still working, whether that's part-time, whether that's full-time, you've reached your preservation age, and while you're still working, you decide to move some of your money over to one of those income stream products that we've already discussed tonight. Now, of course, you've left your superannuation account open with a small balance in there. Remember, your employer needs to put money in there. Based on a question I saw come through around contributing to a pension product, you cannot contribute directly into a pension product, which is why the super account would remain open if you're still working. Now, the transition to retirement product will look like exactly what you showed us with the income stream, but there is a difference in taxation around this particular product. The earnings tax continues to be the same as it is in the superannuation stage. Once you've permanently retired, the earnings tax disappears. In other words, your investment returns will look slightly different when you've stopped working versus when you are working, because that's something the fund looks after for you. Now, many people will move their money in, and the big difference here with the transition to retirement is the fact that you are limited on how much you can take out. So when you're fully retired, you mentioned you can take a lump sum. You cannot do that whilst you're in transition to retirement stage. You also mentioned that when you're full-time retired or fully retired, you get to pick and choose how much you'd like to draw out of that, bar accepting the minimums, but there's no maximum. There is whilst you're still working, and you are limited to 10% of the balance. So if you move 300,000 across, you cannot draw more than 30,000 out in 1 year. It is also a consideration around tax. If you're over 60, all of that money you draw out will be tax-free. If you're under 60, there might be some tax implications attached to it.
But there could also be tax advantage.
Absolutely.
I think that's where it's probably important to discuss this. This is, you talked about people having their own story. This is a really good example of taking full advantage based on the story, isn't it?
That's right. And sometimes people will ask us, well, if I'm trying to build up my retirement savings in those last few years, what benefits is this going to give me if I'm actually doing the reverse and I'm taking the money out of the system? Why would I do that? And the answer to that is, there's a couple of reasons you might actually do it. Taxation is one reason. And Josh, I know we discussed this ourselves through looking back over the questions. Sometimes there can be strategies involved with maybe recontributing that money into a different account or recontributing it back into your own account. It can get complicated, but there can be some lovely strategies there.
Yeah, and so if you actually spoke to, whether you've got your own financial advisor that you spoke to them or you spoke to one of our team, what they would do is actually look at your circumstance and say, you could use a transition to retirement stream to income stream to actually reduce your own assessable income and therefore reduce your tax. You might, as you're approaching retirement, use it to actually take money out of your account and move it into a spouse's account, which there's some really good planning opportunities, especially as you're approaching pension age, which we won't unpack. That'll take itself half an hour. But there is some really great opportunity here. And as you said, you may be withdrawing more than you need. There's a lot of ways you can think about, well, what do I do with that excess? Where can I put that excess income?
And I think before we move on from this, the final message I would have on this is, if you're resonating with this and you think you are preservation age and you're trying to wrap your head around this strategy and how you would use it, you don't have to have all the answers. That's what the financial planners at Sunsuper are for. They will model it out for you and tell you whether there's a tax benefit attached to this to save you the heartache of trying to figure it out. Tonight's more about prompting you to think about these questions if you do talk to a planner.
I was going to say, talking about prompts, we're having a nice conversation. We might just want to push it along a little. So I talked a little bit earlier about different choices that you can have at retirement.
Yeah.
What do you see as the pros and cons with those?
Look, we're going to break it down into three. Obviously, with the retirement income stream, there is a lot of advantages to that. And clearly, one of the logistical advantages is continuing to have that income paid to you. And obviously, that's tax-free if you're over 60. The fact that you can also access lump sums in an emergency situation, for example, means that it is a really fluid product with lots of flexibility around it. And remember, once you've retired, all of the earnings in that product are tax-free. I don't know of another product on the market that can emulate that, and the only consideration here is that there is a minimum you must take. Now, sometimes people don't want the income stream. They might have assets external to super, and they might want.
I'd say one of the most common questions I get is, why should I start an income stream? Can't I just leave it?
Yeah, especially if you do have other income coming from other sources. And the answer is, of course, you can leave it. Obviously, that will mean there's no income coming through, but that's okay. You do have access to that super as a lump sum when and if you need. The only difference, though, I should draw out here by choosing to leave it in super is the earnings tax. So in other words, if you're in the exact same investment option, you might find your returns slightly lower in a superannuation environment because super does attract a 15% earnings tax. Other than that, you do have the choice to leave it in super. And then finally, you could choose to withdraw it all. And very often people cannot wrap their heads around the fact that once you do retire, or if you're still working and 65, you can access every single penny of that superannuation tax-free if you wish. But I don't think many people would want to do that without a plan for what happens on the other side. As we said, there's no other product that can give you that tax-free access. So I think now, Josh, we'll sort of move on to thinking more practically about how you can build up that balance and some considerations on a more everyday basis for the moment.
Yep. And I think it's important, Ruth, you made the point a couple of times, superannuation is the most concessionally taxed environment we have in Australia, and particularly if you're over the age of 60, particularly if it's in a retirement income stream. So it's important to think about how you can maximise that. The two ways we're going to talk about is understanding how you're invested and making sure that your investments are still working hard for you. That's a difficult conversation to have with what we've experienced over the last 12 months, but we'll come to that in a moment. Ruth will also then outline, which we've had a lot of questions about, when can I put more money into super? And then we'll also talk about how you can think about maximising your super. In most cases, we've got it in various places, how you can bring that together. And importantly, as we've already said the number of times, but we'll say it again, it's really important you get guidance and advice here. Your story is your story, and to take full advantage of that, you really need to make sure you're getting the right guidance. So we will come back to that point and why we see it as so important shortly. If I can, though, just talk about the typical way that superannuation funds invest, and this is how Sun Super invests our members' money up until the age of 55 if they make no investment choice. And this is our balanced option. About 80% of our members are actually invested in it. And what you can see from this chart is that about half of it is invested in Australian and international shares, and that's not untypical of any super fund in the country when it comes to their default investment. So half of it is in shares. About 70% of it, though, in total, is in what we call growth-orientated assets. So shares, property, private capital, assets that we know will give you really good long-term return, but come at the risk of volatility, as we've seen over the last 12 months. So what we do for you at Sun Super is once you turn 55, unless you make an investment choice, we will automatically start to move you gradually from our balanced option to our retirement option. So for any of you who've never made an investment choice, who are over the age of 65, this is typically where you'll see the bulk of your balance. If you're between the ages of 55 and 65, you'll be somewhere in between the two. And as you can see with the retirement option, still invests in all the same things as the balanced option, but instead of having 70% exposure to those growth volatile assets, it's actually got about 50% exposure. And instead of half of its money being in shares, about a third of the money is in shares. The reason this is important, for a point I'll come to next, is even though you're in retirement and our natural tendency is to want to become more conservative with our investments, your retirement, as we've already talked about, may be something that goes for 20 or 30 years. And it's important to still be taking advantage where you're comfortable of that growth opportunity. And if I can give you an illustration of what I mean here. What I've done in this chart is I've taken that typical account balance for a person who's 65, $300,000, and said, well, if they invested that just prior to the global financial crisis, what would that be worth today? Now, that $300,000, not only is it invested in this period, but that person I've got drawing down that minimum income that they have to take. So starting at that 4% and increasing as they age. And what you can see here is, yes, the global financial crisis was horrific, but in this you can see the blue line is actually our balanced option, the orange line is our retirement option. In both cases, although this person is still actually taking an income, they are actually seeing that performance grow their balance and grow their super. It's a really important function of the assets we invest in. What though, and this is a reflection also as to what we saw happen over the last 12 months, what though if I chose on my journey, when there was a market downfall, to move my money into cash or a more conservative investment? And what I'm showing here is that a person just prior to the bottom of the GFC moved their investment from balanced or growth into the cash option. And although that person may feel more secure about that choice, although they don't have to worry about volatility of share markets, that security has come at a cost. And that cost is that you're seeing there isn't any growth opportunity, there's no growth potential. They're actually starting to bite into their capital. They're drawing down, and as you can see in this chart, it effectively means that your money runs out sooner. Ruth, I know we got a lot of questions through in regard to exactly this.
Yeah.
Was there anything specific that came through you think?
I can remember a couple of comments coming through those questions that were very much around cash and the, in relation to last year where we saw a lot of people make big decisions around moving away from share markets, because clearly people understand that their time frame is no longer as long as it used to be, and people are a little bit more nervous when they're in retirement. So I think what we're just trying to show people here is, yes, whilst you can move into cash and get that sort of security, it does come at a price, right? So security comes at high cost sometimes.
And I would suggest we're highlighting the extreme here.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this is what we try to do with that retirement option I showed you before. We're trying to give you security. We're trying to give you access to some of those conservative investments like cash and fixed interests and even infrastructure. But we also want to give you exposure to growth assets, things like shares. And it's important. You know, we have that old saying of don't put all your eggs in one basket. Yeah. And I think this highlights that we don't want you to put all your money in shares unless you're really confident and comfortable with that. Likewise, we probably wouldn't suggest you put all your money in cash. Really, it's important to think about how a fund like Sunsuper can diversify across that for you.
And at the end of the day, though, we do want you to know it is your money. You do have choice. We don't want you lying in bed at night worrying about your superannuation. And if you're trying to get a true test of what your investment profile or your risk tolerance is, think back to how you felt last year. If you didn't really worry too much about it during the COVID pandemic and the volatility, or you saw opportunity. So sometimes those extreme times on the markets can really be a test for what your true risk profile is.
And I'd suggest we'll come back to that in 1 second actually. But where I thought I would finish is this, interestingly, is a slide that I actually made in 2017. And I found it was actually very, very relevant today. And what I'm showing here is in the dark blue, this is what we projected as being our 10-year return. And this is what we put in our product disclosure statement, which really is where we say this is what our investment team is setting out to achieve. So back in 2009, we said that by 2019, those numbers in the dark blue is what we would achieve for our members after inflation. So those numbers are adjusted for inflation. In other words, real money that you're earning in your account after the cost of living increases. In the light blue, we actually in 2019 readjusted our forecasts. This was before COVID. We were in a very blissful place then. We were more worried back then about what markets were doing because of everyday things, because of what the US was doing, because of what China was doing. And back then, we were also concerned about things being very overpriced. And you can see there, we lowered our expectations effectively for our investment returns. That's what I showed in 2017 and updated in 2019. How's it reflect now? This is what we in fact achieved for our members up until December for the 10 years in spite of COVID, and remembering that that 10 years would have come in at the direct back of the global financial crisis. Real return after inflation, these numbers are actually quite stark. So what I'm trying to show here is, yes, downturns are uncomfortable. Yes, they do happen, probably more often than we like. But if you're invested in a diversified way that you're comfortable with, it can actually pay really important dividends in the long run. But Ruth, I might get you to close off this section, then we'll move into about contributions.
Look, tonight's message and the theme of tonight, you might have guessed by now, is about choice. And of course, you do have choice on how to invest your super. And of course, an income stream. Remembering, just to clarify, it's a question I get a lot as well, is people not sure what happens once they've retired, and reminding you that your super still accumulates based on the earnings. So it's still invested, it's still earning, and it's never been more important to be invested properly than it is when you're entering retirement stage. You can control it yourself through our mobile app, through your account online, and if you don't want to take that decision or you're not sure what's the most appropriate option for you, give us a call and we'll talk you through it. And we'll even help to talk you through that risk profiling to make sure that it's accurate and suitable to your investor needs. So this is not something you have to do on your own. It is certainly something that there's lots of help available for. Because it is a big decision and we don't want you worrying about it at night time. There's enough to worry about, isn't there, Josh?
Absolutely.
Now, look, what I often say to people, it's all well and good to tell me all about the wonderful investment earnings that you can get at a fund like Sunsuper, but we can't earn investment earnings on nothing. Technically, something does need to be in there for it to earn. And your super has been fed through contributions. Now, we're going to talk first of all quickly about the employer contributions. So this first section, we're going to focus on contributions contributions that might be fed through while you're still working, for example. For most of us, our super balances have been made up from contributions from the employer. This is the mandated 9.5%. And some employers will give more than that if they're nice, but the mandated 9.5% is what you may be, most of us would be receiving. You may have also engaged in a salary sacrifice program whereby you've been directing the payroll to send a portion of your salary straight to superannuation so that you can pick up the concessional tax of 15%, which is what these concessional contributions are taxed at. Now, sometimes people can't do salary sacrifice, or they may not have sort of known about it at the beginning of a year.
They may be self-employed.
Or they may be self-employed, like my own husband. And this is sometimes where you can feed money through from your own bank account and then claim it as a tax deduction. So it's almost like a DIY salary sacrifice. It comes out the same in the wash. These are all called concessional contributions because they are taxed at a concessional rate of 15%. And for most of the population, 15% is a nicer tax rate than your own marginal tax rate. And because it is so attractive, they've decided to put a limit on it. So, you know, we can never have enough of a good thing, can you not?
That's right.
So the limit on this one is technically $25,000 per annum per person, and it does include all three. Now, Josh, there is talk, isn't there, of this moving, increasing slightly soon?
It's a bit of a watch this space.
Yeah.
Based on current legislation, we should actually see this number move from 25,000 to 27,500 on the 1st July. We might just wait and see. We haven't seen the ATO formally announce that, but be aware that that may increase by $2,500 from 1 July.
So just be aware of that. You'll see a lot of that in the media and through our communications as well. Now, the other type, which is often more commonly asked about when people are getting close to retirement, is the after-tax contributions. So we're talking here about money that's already in your bank account. So we would like to assume that if the money is in the bank account already, it has already been taxed. Okay, so that type of money tends to enter the super environment tax-free. The government acknowledge they've already had their cut of it. So that will enter superannuation tax-free. Now, because there's no concession here, there's a far more generous limit on this one. And the limit here is $100,000 per person per annum. But there are some slight quirks to that rule where you can bring forward a couple of years together, and we'll talk about that in a moment.
And I should also point out, again, watch this space. We might see that number indexed to 110,000 from the 1st July. Yeah,
and age is another important consideration here. There will be limits, yes, on how much you can put in, but you've also got to be very cognizant of the fact that there will be changes that occur as you're getting older that might stop you from putting these contributions through. And that's why being on top of these kind of rules, making sure you're talking to a planner about what your strategy might be. People have missed out on the opportunity here because they've left it too late, or they haven't spoken to somebody in enough time to do these kind of things. Now, look, after-tax contributions can sometimes trigger government incentives as well. And we did talk about this the last time. We're not going to go into too much detail tonight, but there are certain incentives to feed money through. And usually they're more attracted for lower income earners or non-working people, for example. And some of those will be based around the government co-contribution, where they'll incentivise you to put some in after tax and they'll match up to $500. And of course, the spouse contribution, where you can feed money into a lower income earning or non-working spouse and be rewarded with a tax offset. That's your favourite strategy, Josh?
Absolutely. And I would actually just highlight there that, okay, we talk about this strategy to people of our generation and younger about you can use this as your circumstances change, you have kids come along, you go to part-time work. But likewise, these are really important as you approach retirement. You might actually see for the first time in your life, your income reduces to a point you can get access to these government incentives. That's again why it's important to think about it. It's important to think about if they don't apply to you, do they apply to a spouse? Because they really only come around twice in your life, either when you're taking time away from the workforce to have kids or raise family, or when you're actually getting ready
Yeah.
for retirement.
And I can't remember how many times I've spoken to people who were not aware of those small little strategies, the government co-contribution and the spouse contribution. And often as you're closer to retirement, you do tend to have a higher disposable income. So finding that $1,000 to feed in for the government co-contribution or the $3,000 you need to feed in for the spouse contribution, it's often easier for people when they're at that later stage of life as opposed to if they're in that early stage of family rearing, for example.
And I'm aware we're coming to time, but the other thing I'd just point out, these are small amounts we're talking about that the government could give you. But if you're going to be potentially in retirement with this money earning interest for 10, 20 years or more, those small amounts will continue to compound with interest and could be a really important part of your balance as you go through retirement.
That's right. Now, look, there is another opportunity through the sale of a property. So I mentioned there was some age limits, and that's when you decide to sell the principal place of residence and you're giving an extra opportunity, regardless of age, to feed money through. Now, like all superannuation rules, there's always a caveat to it and there's always an exception to the rule. And if we look back at the light blue type of contributions, back to the concessional type contribution, there is a sort of a caveat to that rule or an exception for people who have less than $500,000. Going back to the year of 2018-19, if you're aware of how close to that 25 you were, you might realise that you've actually got some opportunities here to play catch up. So in other words, if you have some leftovers, if you like, from 18-19, 19-20 financial year, you are now bringing that with you. That can open up some incredible opportunity. You can link it back to transition to retirement products, etc., etc. So there's some great strategies you might be able to use that for.
Absolutely, and some really good tax strategies.
Great
Again,
tax strategies.
It's your story. It's that conversation that helps you determine how to best use them.
Yep.
But we are getting to the end.
We are. So let's fly through this. The last sort of thing I have to share before I give it to Josh to wrap up is more around the ages. So we had a lot of questions come through about, I'm certain age, can I put money in? And what we would say is that after tax contribution, you can feed money in and you can basically use 3 years worth in one go. In other words, you can use $300,000 as a contribution if you are under the age of 67. After the age of 67, you cannot use 3 years in advance anymore. You actually have to meet the work test. In other words, you do have to be contributing to the workforce to be able to contribute after tax after that age. And then obviously up to the age of 75, the spouse contribution is something that you can consider. So again, it's just about reminding you that it's not an endless opportunity. There are time frames that you've got to work with, and talking to our planners can make sure you don't miss out on those opportunities.
And I think it's important to recognise the government knows there needs to be assistance in this space. The government realises that for many people trying to get money in super, there are those limits and constraints. So over recent years, we've seen things like these ages, we've actually seen increase. In the last federal budget, these numbers, these ages were increased to give people a bit more opportunity as they're approaching age, pension age and beyond. We're seeing now, as a previous slide touched on, around the ability to actually put proceeds from the sale of your principal residence into your super after you've retired.
And we've got a question on that, which we'll come to in the questions and answer session,
wonderful.
if you like, Josh.
Because I think especially at these times where we're seeing housing do what
it's crazy,
doing.
the housing market,
But what I would like to do, though, is try and pull this together a bit with the story that we were saying earlier, that we've taken small steps here, and I want you to understand that I've put this through our retirement forecaster and modeller to actually see how this plays out. That I've taken that typical member that we've got retiring with $300,000 at the age of 65, noting that person when they're 55 probably has around $100,000 worth. And what we're saying is, well, what happens if that person makes, rather than just super guarantee, makes a bit of an additional contribution through salary sacrifice or government contributions? What if that person invests with a stronger growth profile to earn that additional 0.5% or 1%. And if we see that person, instead of retiring with $300,000, retiring with an extra $60,000, it means that their lifestyle in retirement has now gone beyond that doing well that we know most of our members want to aim for, to now actually going to that premium lifestyle. But the other thing I'd call out here is, again, we've put an extreme to this, and we've identified that this person is actually choosing to run their balance out by the time that they reach, in this case, age 90. Now, although we're showing the extreme here, again, I call out that if you speak to your own advisor or speak to one of our advisors, they can actually do these forecasts for you. They can do a range of these paths to look at how those different scenarios may play out. What happens if you take the minimum income? What happens if you take income above that? What happens if you're invested in cash as opposed to being invested in the retirement option, balanced option, or one of our many other investment options? This is just one path, and again, we recognise you're all on a different path. Your own journey might actually have different paths within it. Speak to us, reach out, and let us actually help you. But Ruth, I think we might both go to this a little bit, that there are 4 key questions that we identified a lot through the pre-submitted questions. And these are questions we get a lot. As Ruth said, we talk to members every single day. It's one of the wonderful advantages of our job. But if you're left with a question mark on these, you really do need to reach out to us. So as Ruth said, many of us go into retirement not knowing what our income needs are. And I put the question to you, do you know what yours are? Do you have sufficient super to get to that income? Do you even know if you've got sufficient super, or do you think you might have to do something more with it? As Ruth said, we often talk to people who could have retired a long time ago because they think they've almost got to save for that $1 million, and the reality could be far different. Are you invested in a way that you're comfortable? We saw a lot of members last year make extreme decisions to invest in cash because of what we saw investment markets doing. Was that really what you needed for comfort? Or by talking to an advisor, by seeking some guidance, could you invest in a way that would make you feel more comfortable but still give you a really good outcome? And do you know what you actually want to do with your super when you retire? As I said, if you answered no to any of those, and these are the questions I think we almost get every day, then we can help you. We can really help to take away the question mark. We can firm it up and really let you know what your story is going to look like. But Ruth, I recognise we do have some people joining us tonight who may not be members. Do you want to just reflect on that, but also reflect on those who are members? Regardless of a merger with Q Super, what are the benefits and how do those benefits flow into their retirement?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to acknowledge that the point where you'll have the most amount of money in your superannuation is often the day you decide to retire. It's that end of the journey. So the home or the partner that you're going to work with throughout that journey is really important. And we talk to people all the time who are really good now at knowing where their super is. But they're not so good at actually knowing why they've chosen that fund or why they're with that particular fund, so understanding what the benefits are. And I often say I'm the same with my private health. I have no idea why I'm with the one I'm with. I just hope it's a good one. But let me help you to understand why Sun Super is a good choice for you and why you should trust us with your money. It's because you do have access to one of the most competitive fee structures in the country, and that's not just whilst you're accumulating super, it's also right throughout your income stream phase. Remembering you've got access to all of those investment options that we talked about. The exact same menu of options you've always had access to will follow you right throughout your income stream stage. You know, you've got multiple channels available to engage with us, whether that's through the app, through your account online, through our advice centre, through the contact centre. And, you know, I think it's really important that you feel comfortable with the fund you're at. No more so more important than that day that you're actually going to enter that retirement stage. Lots of questions came through about people asking how they consolidate into Sunsuper. The biggest concern was from people who already had income streams with other providers, and I just wanted to highlight to remind you that you can, of course, still consolidate those pension accounts into Sunsuper if you want to do that. So just because you're already at pension stage, for example, if you're in an income stream, doesn't mean you can't bring super across. You're not locked in. You can still move pension products over and around. So all of that can be done online, or you can talk to us if you're not sure how to go about the process of doing it. But I just wanted to answer that question because there was a few people trying to bring external funds in and not sure whether they could do it, and absolutely you can. It's a simple process.
Now, true to form, you and I have talked longer than we should have, and I can feel a number of our colleagues who are actually outside this room
telling us to stop.
So you can post your questions. We hope we've responded to a lot throughout. I know you've been really good in keeping an eye on it.
Yeah.
But in the few minutes we've got remaining, do you want to highlight some of the questions that maybe you've seen come through?
Yeah, there's one quick one that came up there as I was talking about the contributions. I wouldn't mind getting just very quickly. Somebody asked, how do I actually make an after-tax contribution? I'll answer that, and then I've got a good one for you actually, Josh. If you want to make an after-tax contribution, log into your account online. Your BPay number and your reference number will be there, and you literally make it as if you're doing an online banking transaction. So it's very, very simple to do the actual contribution through your biller code and reference number available. Now, Josh, this actually, there's one question here that I think is worth asking, because we had a few pre-submitted that were alluding to the same point, and it's from Jason. And Jason asks, what is an annuity? Now I know that's a big question. That's the big question, but just give us a 2-minute.
An annuity, to be really clunky about it, is a life insurance product, and an annuity is where it's quite conservative in the way it's invested, and it's where you can use your super, you can use other investment income, you provide it to an annuity provider, and then they guarantee an income that you'll be provided. So where it's different to something like what we've talked about tonight, an annuity gives you guaranteed income, but you can't take withdrawals. Gives you guaranteed income, but you don't have flexibility with it. The other thing to note, though, is annuities are invested very conservatively. You've got no investment choice. So Sunsuper has a range of investment options that allow you to have some degree of control and influence over what your capital does. With an annuity, that's gone. That's taken away from you. And effectively, again, this is maybe a little blunt, but annuities are very safe and secure. So as a result of that safety and security, the investment returns are very, very small. So it's not much different to being in a fixed term deposit or a cash account. And that's where the trade-off is, that if you invest in something that's got opportunity for growth, there's going to be a level of risk. If you invest in something very safe and secure, that risk is gone, so you're not going to get the opportunity. And it's really thinking of that way up. In terms of an annuity, though, definitely would suggest if that's something someone's thinking about, that they just reach out and get some guidance and advice. Again, I think it's a point of actually understanding what they're trying to achieve, and if it's around investments, that could very likely be achieved through a retirement income account as well.
Now we have questions. The iPad is hot in my hand. There's a lot of questions coming through, so I'm going to do my best to pull a few out that I think we probably more so didn't cover. And there's one here from Gillian, and Gillian asks about insurance during retirement, and should she have it? Now I know this is quite personal, but let's talk about, in general terms, where does insurance sit with respect to people entering into retirement?
And I know this was something we found interesting in the pre-submit.
That's right, we had a few in that as well.
Generally, superannuation funds will stop giving you insurance when you're age pension age. Some super funds may do it a bit before that. The reason for it is twofold. Firstly, as you get older, insurance becomes incredibly expensive, almost to the point of being prohibitive. And you have to think, well, what's the way up for that cost? And the second reason why we stop it is effectively when you get to age pension age, you've got the age pension there, but there's also other allowances and concessions and things that the government will often have in place that you sort of go, well, does that limit the need for insurance? The other thing I'd say though is certainly as you move into retirement, and although research shows that many people move into retirement now with debt, mortgage debt, also debt when they're trying to assist their children, it's important to think about, well, how do I manage that debt? And is insurance the way I manage it? And I'd actually question that. So yes, we had many questions around insurance, but I think again, it's an important discussion about not how do I get that insurance, but what do you need that insurance for? And it's important to note that as you get older, absolutely you can buy insurance, but you won't be able to buy it in super. It'll be outside.
Yeah. And it can be very expensive too, can't it?
So again, get some direction on that. I think though, maybe time for one more.
Yeah, okay, there's one more. Okay. I'll ask one more actually, and we'll wrap it up on this because it is relevant. There's a lot of questions in here that are coming through that I think are quite personal questions. So I would remind you about that ability to put your details through on the financial planning page, or the request page you'll see on the right hand side of your screen. And this actually leads nicely into this question. There's a question here from John, and this is an interesting one. I like this question. John has said that his spouse recently got financial advice from her super fund and she had to pay $350 for that. Why does Sun Super not charge for financial planning on their accounts?
So I think there's a couple of things. If I can talk firstly about probably what's at our heart, that we believe every one of our members, we believe every Australian is entitled to financial advice and guidance. And as part of the way that we're structured, as part of the way that we're set up, we have salaried financial advisors who work for us. They're not there to sell a product. They're not earning commissions. They're there to actually make sure our members are doing exactly what they need and getting their best retirement. And we don't believe our members should have to pay for that. And so when it comes to our advice model, any questions that you have that we've talked about tonight, investments, contributions, starting an income stream, starting a transition to retirement income, whatever it may be, when it comes to your Sun Super account, you can speak to us at absolutely no cost in regard to that. Now, we recognise people may have more comprehensive circumstances or issues that they need to discuss. Well, we can't go through those more comprehensive issues, but we do have a panel of carefully selected independent advisors we can get you in touch with, and depending on your circumstances and needs, there may be a charge for that. But absolutely, we believe you should be able to have any of the conversations we've had tonight at no cost, and you should be able to get the guidance that you need to achieve your best possible retirement. On that note, I might close off,
Absolutely.
Ruth, but can I thank all of you for joining us? I know there's been a lot of information to go through. Sorry, Ruth and I got chatted. We haven't been in the same room together for 12 months. Ruth, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Has.
It's been a lot of weeks' work getting through to tonight, so it's been wonderful for us. I encourage you though, please do submit any questions that you have. Give us a call. You'll get a survey from us that will give you additional opportunity to do so. And for those of you who have already written to us, if we haven't been able to respond to your question directly tonight, we will do so in the coming days. On behalf of both Ruth and myself, as well as the entire team here at Sun Super, we would like to wish you a very good night, a very good week, and we look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, mother-in-law.